The day my daughter called me a burden across my own dinner table. There's a specific kind of quiet that settles over a room once something gets said that can never be pulled back. Not the awkward kind of pause, but the kind where everyone realizes in the same breath that something just came to an end. I've only experienced that particular stillness once. It happened in my dining room on an ordinary Sunday night with a pot roast steaming in the middle of the table and my daughter seated 3 feet from me. My name is Walter Hensley, and I worked 33 years as a civil engineer for the city of Tacoma, Washington, retiring 4 years back at 57. I reviewed road contracts, signed off on drainage plans, and once spent 14 months locked in a dispute with a contractor over load specs on a bridge on the east side of town. I won't drag you through it. Short version, I was right. The contractor eventually admitted it, and that bridge still stands, which I find satisfying. I mention this because it tells you something about how I approach trouble. I don't rush, I don't shout. I just keep rechecking the numbers until the truth becomes impossible to argue with. Before I get to what happened next, I'd genuinely like to know where you're watching from. My wife Diane is 59 and has been gently fixing my blind spots since we met at a backyard cookout back in 1989. She spent her career as a school librarian and has a book recommendation for literally every life situation, asked for or not. When our water heater died 3 winters ago, she handed me a novel about a man restoring an old cabin in Montana and told me it would help me process my feelings about the repair bill. It didn't. I read the whole thing anyway. That's what 35 years of marriage will do to you. My closest friend is Gary Pruitt. We've known each other 26 years, ever since we worked the same municipal sewer project back in 1998, and discovered we both packed our own lunches, both despised meetings that should have been emails, and both agreed real chili needs at least 4 hours on the stove with 0 canned bean shortcuts. Gary's 62, still working as a project manager for a builder in Tacoma, and he picks up his phone within 2 rings no matter the hour. I've tested this more than I'd like to admit. My daughter Hannah is 32. Sharp, funny, and stubborn in exactly the way Diane is stubborn. She reaches a conclusion fast and grips it tight. For most of her life, that stubbornness worked in my favor. I remember when she was around 19, home for Thanksgiving, and my brother-in-law cracked a joke implying city engineers were just paper pushers who slowed down the people doing real construction. He laughed when he said it. Hannah didn't. She put her fork down and spent the next few minutes calmly explaining, with specific examples, exactly what a civil engineer does and why every road he drove on existed because of people like her father. He finished his dinner quietly after that. I never said a word. I didn't have to. Then she married Connor Wade, and over the 2 years that followed, something in her shifted in a way I didn't fully grasp until it was too late to steer it back. Connor's 34. Not a bad man. I want that clear because it matters here. But he grew up in a family where money isn't just money. It's the language love gets spoken in. His father, Marcus, runs a commercial property firm in Bellevue, and I saw the pattern clearly that first Christmas after the wedding. Marcus stood up before dessert, announced that he and his wife were giving Hannah and Connor a check, then said the dollar amount out loud. Not privately to Connor, but to the whole table, smiling the entire time. The room applauded. Connor beamed. Hannah looked a little startled but pleased. I glanced at Diane. She was looking at her plate. That single moment told me everything about how Connor understood generosity, and therefore how he'd eventually measure mine. The first small sign came about 18 months into the marriage when Connor mentioned at dinner that his parents had paid for a car repair. Nothing aggressive, just a passing comment, but it was the 3rd time in 3 visits his parents had come up in terms of what they'd financially done for the couple. I brushed it off as conversation. The second sign came over the phone. Hannah mentioned almost casually that Marcus and his wife had offered to help with a down payment. She said it the way people say things hoping it'll prompt a matching offer. I told her that was generous. She paused a beat too long, then said, "You and Mom could be part of it too, if you wanted." I said, "Of course I'd want to." She sounded relieved in a way that left me a little unsettled, though I couldn't have explained why at the time. 6 weeks before that Sunday dinner, I met with my financial advisor, Pam Osei, at her office downtown. I told her I wanted to liquidate part of my portfolio and prepare a $90,000 gift toward Hannah and Connor's down payment. She pulled up the accounts, checked the numbers, and asked twice if I was sure. I said yes both times. She started the paperwork. Nothing had transferred yet. Nothing was signed between me and the kids. But the process was in motion, and Hannah knew because I'd told her, and Connor knew because she'd told him. That Sunday was an ordinary one. Diane had the pot roast going since 11 that morning, and the whole house smelled like it. Hannah and Connor arrived at 6. Hannah brought wine. Connor walked in staring at his phone, which he set face up beside his water glass, a habit I'd long since given up commenting on. About 40 minutes into dinner, talk turned to Christmas, and Connor mentioned his parents flying everyone to their lake house for the holidays. Hannah said it sounded lovely. Diane asked for dates. I said it sounded like a nice trip. Nothing more. Then Connor muttered, almost to himself, "At least someone actually makes an effort." Diane looked up. I looked up. He kept cutting his meat, eyes down. Hannah said quietly, "Connor, don't." He set his knife down, looked straight at me and said, "You know what? I'll just say it. What you've contributed to this family has always been next to nothing. My dad has done more for Hannah in a single year than you've managed in the last decade." I said his name, a warning. He wasn't finished. He put his palm flat on the table, not quite a slam, but hard enough to rattle the glasses, and said, "You've never really counted as real family here. My father is the one who actually takes care of us. Everyone at this table knows it." I looked at Hannah. My daughter stared at the tablecloth and said, "Honestly, Dad, you're kind of a burden on us at this point." Diane put her fork down. The kitchen clock was the only sound in the house for what felt like a long time. Connor's phone screen lit up, then dimmed again. The roast sat untouched in Diane's good serving dish, the one she only brings out for family. I let those words sit for about 10 seconds. Then I looked at them both and said evenly, "Well, good to know. I'll be withdrawing the down payment money I was preparing to gift you." Hannah's expression changed like a power outage. Instant, total. Connor opened his mouth to speak. I picked my fork back up and kept eating. Nobody said much after that. They left around 8. Diane walked them out, came back to the kitchen, and stood in the doorway a moment before saying anything. Then she poured a glass of wine, sat down, and said, "I'm going to need to know exactly what Pam's timeline looks like." I told her I'd call in the morning. She nodded and took a long sip. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked at nothing. We just sat there a while. I called Gary from the back patio that night. He picked up on the first ring. I told him everything. There was a real pause on his end, the kind he takes when he wants to be sure he heard correctly before responding. He asked, "Did she actually say the word burden?" I said yes. He went quiet, then said, "What did Diane do when he put his hand on the table?" I told him she set her fork down. He said, "I'd have driven straight out of state." I told him I appreciated that. Then he asked, "You want comfort or you want the truth?" I said the truth. He said, "The truth is this was already sitting inside her before tonight. Connor just gave her the opening to finally say it. And now you know something you couldn't have learned any other way. That's not nothing, Walter. That's something you needed." I stood out there another minute after he said it. The air was cold, and somewhere down the block someone had a fire going. I said, "Yeah, I know." He told me to call him after I talked to Pam. I said I would. The next morning at 8:45, I called Pam from the kitchen, and my coffee went stone cold while we talked. I told her to stop everything, no further liquidation. She said understood, asked if I wanted the cancellation in writing. I said yes. She had it to me by end of day. The whole call took 6 minutes. The money was still mine. Nothing had ever been signed or formally promised, so there was nothing complicated to reverse. Hannah called 4 times before noon. I picked up on the 4th. She apologized, said she hadn't meant it, that she'd gotten swept up agreeing with Connor without really hearing her own words. I let her finish, then told her, "Hannah, I don't think you misspoke. I think that's something that's been sitting in you a while, and Connor just handed you the moment to say it out loud. Now I know." She started crying. I didn't hang up. "She's still my daughter, Dabe." That part didn't change at the table, and it wasn't changing on a Monday morning call either. But I didn't take back the decision, because whatever she meant it in that moment, and she needed to sit with that weight the same way I'd sat with it the night before. We talked once a week for 2 months. Short, careful conversations. Connor never called. I didn't expect him to. Around month 4, Hannah started stopping by the house alone on Saturday mornings. She and Diane would sit in the kitchen while I puttered in the garage with tools I didn't actually need, just close enough to hear her laugh when something made her laugh. Slowly, those visits stopped feeling like repair work and started feeling like just visiting. Without my $90,000 and without Marcus stepping in the way Connor had assumed he would, the couple couldn't move forward on the house they'd picked. They went back to their lender, qualified for a smaller loan on their own, and found a place in a quieter part of town. Smaller, but within reach on their actual income. The whole thing took 7 more months. No lawyers, no legal mess, no more drama than what had already happened over a pot roast on a Sunday night. The gift was mine to give and mine to take back. That's all that happened. Connor has never directly brought up that night since. What I do know is that at the housewarming, 8 months later, he met me at the door, shook my hand and said, "Thanks for coming, Walter," and meant it in a way he hadn't meant much of anything he'd said to me in 2 years. That was enough to start with. I brought them a full Stanley toolbox, good quality, figuring a house always needs something tightened or fixed, and it felt more honest than a check. Diane brought a potted plant grown from a cutting off our kitchen windowsill, telling Hannah it was low maintenance and nearly impossible to kill, her sincerest wish for the marriage. Hannah laughed so hard she spilled her drink, and in that sound I heard the same girl who once spent 4 minutes at a Thanksgiving table defending her father to a man who hadn't asked for the fight and didn't enjoy losing it. Gary showed up with a 6-pack and found me by the back door, watching the room. He stood next to me quietly for a minute, which is one of the things I've always liked about him. Then he said, "They turned out fine, you know." I said, "Give it time, Gary." He said, "You're the most optimistic pessimist I've ever met." I told him I'd been called worse. Diane found me eventually and handed me a paper plate with cake on it, scanning the room the way she eyes a shelf she's thinking of rearranging. She said, "That plant's going to be dead in 3 weeks. Hannah's killed every plant I've ever given her." I asked why she brought it anyway. She said, "Because it was the right thing to bring." I ate the cake. It was good. The October light came in sideways through the windows, making everything in the room look warmer than it probably was. Diane was already across the room telling someone a story, gesturing the way she does when she's enjoying herself. Hannah was laughing at something Connor said, a real laugh, the unguarded kind. I stood there with my paper plate thinking about Pam documenting a cancellation on a quiet Monday morning, about a bridge on the east side of Tacoma that's still standing, and about that particular silence that falls over a room when something can't be taken back. Some things you build, some things you simply stop paying for. The trick is knowing which is which before the pot roast goes cold.